So I made a conscious decision to try and be more positive in the type of videos that I'm producing. I'm trying to highlight commanders that I find more inviting or fun and shying away from the commanders that are excessively powerful or rely on degenerate combos, unless the commander literally cannot avoid it. This also means excluding certain commanders entirely from my docket, because why would I promote them if I don't want to actually play against them out in the wild? If I put out a video to thousands of discerning individuals, there's a good chance that that may have an effect on the overall sort of landscape of Commander and influence people's deck building decisions. And if it's not something that I find enjoyable, then I'm not going to make a video about it. But this Commander is one that I actually see a lot of misinformation floating around online about, and a lot of the videos that try to do justice to this Commander leave out a lot of specific rules interactions that I think really need to be covered. And there's also a lot of discourse regarding how to win with this deck, and I think that nobody's really come to a solid, definitive answer as to what the best sort of build path would be. And for that reason, this video is intended to sort of clear the air a bit and act as sort of the commonly missed or not commonly discussed rules points for the new commander, Nadu. But before we get into the actual video proper, I do just want to throw out there that I'm doing something special starting today, moving forward for this next week, which is you are going to get a video from me every single day for an entire week. I know that sounds like a lot, but there's a lot of MH3 commanders that I've been testing, and it took me a little bit longer. I had to skip a week because not only is there video production to be concerned about, but I just had to test everything. I mean, there's so much to do with these types of videos. I don't want to just say something without actually having looked at it and tested it for you guys. So it just took me a week to sort of catch up to that fact. But you're going to be getting a video every single day for an entire week. So get pumped for that. It's going to be deck techs for commanders. It's going to be topic videos. And also at the very end of it, I'm planning at least on doing a 100 card deck review or 100 commander review of my decks that I've made over this past year. So be excited for that and pay attention for this entire upcoming week of content. But before we get into that, I want to be very clear about my perspective regarding this commander. It is incredibly divisive. And although I would not mind playing against this commander out in the wild, I think that other people very well might. After all, this commander can routinely present wins on turns 4 and 5, and in my testing, I've actually had multiple turn 3 wins with this commander, and that is no longer a casual deck. I think that the use case for this commander lies in the more competitive format. If you're playing this in a CDH pod, for instance, I think you're going to find that it's right at home there. In fact, recent tournament showings have actually demonstrated that Nadu is upwards of 33% win rate, which is actually kind of disgusting. I think if you're playing it outside of CDH, as long as your group is okay with some of the most powerful commanders ever printed at MTG, I think this commander falls in that slot as well, and you'll find a good home for it there as well. I think that there's a specific comment that really sort of does a good job of summarizing this, and if you are the person that actually commented this on MTG Specs video, please comment down in the description below, because I actually really liked sort of the nuance of your comment, and I would love everyone else's opinion on this comment as well, and this is what they had to say. So this is by the user Dragonfire, and again, it was on MTG Specs video regarding Nadu. I do a lot of sort of like scouting out of videos before I make my own. I also do a lot of comparison and analysis of deck lists before I compile my own deck list, so that's why I was watching their video. And Dragonfire says, I like to think I would play any deck except stacks, but I think I would just scoop versus the commander unless it is CEDH. This is not, and I think he meant traditional EDH commander. And then Specs responded, thanks for this comment. There's so much back and forth on where the commander fits. There's another comment saying that this isn't CDH, so clearly it's quite a divisive card. I'm wondering if you could build interesting, casual decks with commanders who have such a competitively high ceiling, ? Is that worth investing time in? I think it might be, but it's clearly not a path everyone wants to travel. And then Dragonfire responds to this, and I think this is sort of the bread and butter here. It's a deck that I would expect to reliably win or be able to win by turn 4. You draw your deck and put all lands into play. I don't expect it to be the most powerful CEDH commander, but it is without a doubt a CEDH commander. The problem is that this commander is like training wheels for bad players. Remove all nuance and skill from the game and give players a commander that they can succeed with in spite of themselves. It's the opposite of taking a relatively weak commander and building a competitive deck around it to showcase your skills for playing the game. You have to go out of your way with this commander for it to not be broken. It's like playing Urza, Lord Artificer, without any artifacts, where you're only playing it for its third ability. You could, for example, build this deck without any abilities that repeatedly target your own creatures, but almost no one is going to do that. It's designed to be a pub stomp commander. And again, as with the recent CDH showings, I think that there's actually some merit to this comment. In fact, I think that it's actually demonstrating to be one of the more powerful CEDH commanders currently in the format. Obviously, once the meta adjusts to the recent Modern Horizon 3 releases, it'll probably be less so. But until then, it's still going to dominate the format moving forward. So much so that I was actually planning on entering a CDH tournament with my own version of a Nadu list because it seems just that powerful. It's a crazy commander. The takeaway before we get into all of the different rulings, rules interactions, how you're going to play this commander and how you're going to win with this commander is this. Use your head. If you're going to be playing this commander in a more powerful pod of people that don't mind if you win routinely on turn 4, great. You found your group, and I think that this will fit right in there. But do not be surprised if other people do not want to play against this commander because obviously, especially with the recent data that we're getting, it is an incredibly strong and deadly consistent commander that it's probably not fit for most casual tables. Don't play this against Timmy with his little precon. Play something else, please. So why is this commander so good? Let's start with the very basics. This is a 3-mana commander in Simic, which it is very easy in Simic colors to play something like, I don't know, a turn 1 mana dork to get this commander out on turn 2. Hence why I was able to present turn 3 wins with this commander. But why is it so good? It starts as early as its actual stat line, which is a 3/4. A 3-mana 3/4 is in and of itself a pretty good rate. But on top of that, it's a flyer, so it's even better for the rate. And it has the typing of wizard, which makes it even better. Now, if you are doing like a bird tribal sort of thing, this commander I'm sure would fit in there or could like helm, be the helm of your deck, so to speak. But really just on the basis of stat line and typing alone, it's a very good rate. But it gets much crazier with its next ability. So Nadu reads, creatures you control have, whenever this creature becomes the target of a spell or ability, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land, put it onto the battlefield. Notice it does not say tapped. Otherwise, put it into your hand, meaning anything that is a non-land goes into your hand. And importantly, this is not drawing you a card. Why does that matter? Well, hold on. We'll get into that. This ability triggers only twice each turn. This is the only card that's ever been printed so far, to the best of my knowledge, that triggers twice each turn. And that is the part that I think breaks this commander wide open. But why does it matter that you're not drawing a card? One card in particular, and that is Orcish Bowmasters. So Orcish Bowmasters shows up in a majority of competitive and high-powered lists because, quite frankly, it's a busted card. 2 mana for the effect of Draw Hate, and it's a flash so you can combat trick or, get in and destroy somebody's important piece or ping them, etc. Orcish Bowmasters has dominated the format, especially in CDH. It is really showing up in a majority of deck lists. And Nadu, not only is it aggressively stat line, meaning that Orcish Bowmasters can't ping this down, but also you get to just combo out with this card and not actually draw anything. So that way the Bowmasters never triggers, meaning that even with the draw punish that we currently have, Nadu gets around that. That is crazy. And aside from the land coming in untapped, which is just another degenerate part of this, if it came in tapped, it would still be an incredibly good card. It just wouldn't be nearly as busted. You would need another piece like an Amulet of Vigor, for instance, or Spelunking, so your land comes in untapped, making this creature much less effective than it is. But you just get the land untapped too. So not only do you get around some of the commonly used cards that punish these types of effects, but on top of that, you get your land untapped, which will fuel the engine, as we will go over in a moment. The last thing that we need to point out about this ability before diving into specifics is the fact that this actually is a static ability for all of your creatures. When you read this first, you might be tempted to understand this as this only triggers twice each turn. That's it. That is incorrect. It triggers twice each turn for every single creature you have. And moreover, Nadu does not care if it is a token or non-token creature, meaning that if you have a card like, let's say, Scoot Swarm on the battlefield, which this is a combo we'll go over, you effectively get to dump your entire deck onto the table, and all your lands onto the table, draw your entire deck, get your win con in your hand, and then blow somebody up. It is insane. So keep that in mind as we move forward, because that is an important piece to this puzzle that I think a lot of people did not see initially upon reading it. It's one of those commanders you read and then you see it do something degenerate to you and you have to read it like 3 more times to understand just how nutty and insane this card is. So let's start getting into some of those really cool interactions and rules texts. So as mentioned, this is only 3 mana, so you are going to be running a majority of the mana dorks in the format, which is sort of a knock against it, I suppose, if you're playing something like CEDH, because you do want more mana dorks. But as we've seen in the past, commanders like Kinnan, which are low-costed Simic commanders, including things like mana dorks in the list to accelerate Kinnan out a little bit faster, actually sees play. And Kinnan, for a long time, was one of the most winning CEDH commanders. Not anymore, of course, but to the point of you can still get away with running mana dorks in a more competitive list. And Nadu wants mana dorks not only to accelerate it out by turn 2, but on top of that, this is another creature that can be targeted with abilities to trigger the twice per turn, meaning that as soon as you have the ability to play something out to target your creatures, Nadu, all of a sudden, while it's on the board and a mana dork is on the board, gives you 4 instances of its ability. And oftentimes that's enough to get the train rolling to just completely derail the entire game. Now, something I haven't really seen come up pretty much whatsoever regarding this commander is the fact that you can flicker it and then it resets its ability. Now, this also counts if you return it to hand, or it gets sacrificed, or it dies and you replay it from the command zone on the same turn, etc. If you've already done the instances of the triggers for every creature, let's say you have a couple lands on the board, etc., and you've sort of run out of steam, if you are able to replay it, like say you bounce it to your hand or you flicker it with something like an Essence Flux or whatever the name of that card is in blue, basically that gives you a new instance of this commander that has not yet seen the twice per turn clause, meaning you get to continuously do its ability after that. So if you have ways to repeatedly flicker this or to return it to your hand, replay it, for instance, etc., that basically sets you up to dump your whole deck onto the table again. So don't forget that fact that it can be flickered and it resets the ability. I think that we should take just a moment to talk about sort of the bread and butter cards of this list. Obviously, the mana dorks are incredibly important. We've gone over the interactions with the commander a bit, but let's talk about the 0 equipped cost equipment, such as Shuko, Umbral Mantle, and of course, Lightning Greaves, that you all know it, you love it. All of these have a 0 equip cost, and why does that matter? Well, that matters because our friend Nadu does not care whether it's a spell or ability, just that something is being targeted on your board, which, by the way, that also triggers from your commander or from your opponent's perspective. So if they try to, let's say, Swords to Plowshares your commander, you must first resolve the Nadu trigger to reveal the top of your library. And if that so happens to be a counter spell, like a Force of Will, etc., you just get to get that into your hand and then get rid of the removal target or removal spell that's targeting your commander. Crazy, I know. But let's talk about why the 0 cost equipment is even more deadly effective. These cards target in order to equip with an ability, meaning that this triggers Nadu. So if you play Shuko, which is a 1 mana equipment, and equip it for 0, targeting your commander, guess what? It triggers, meaning that you get to reveal the top and then put it into your hand. What if Nadu is the only creature on your board and you have Shuko out? Can you trigger it twice? The answer is absolutely yes. You cannot unequip the equipment. So once Shuko is equipped to a creature, you cannot just unequip it unless there is another valid target or you have an effect that specifically unequips this equipment. However, what you can do while equipped is pay 0 again to target Nadu with the equip ability. Now, this works for Umbral Mantle and Shuko. It does not work for Lightning Greaves because once Lightning Greaves is equipped, it gives your creature Shroud, meaning you cannot target it with abilities, and equipping is an ability. So that clears the air, hopefully, regarding the 0 equip cost artifacts. But let's talk about how we can basically make this go immediately infinite with our commander. So first and foremost, if we hit one of the various mana dorks, ideally, if in an ideal world, right, we have a mana dork plus Nadu out plus Shuko, right? That's sort of like the wet dream of this deck, is to be set up with those cards. And as long as nobody has interaction to counter the ability or to destroy your Shuko, etc., what that means is that you can just continuously equip until you hit something like a Spring Heart Nantuko or a Scoot Swarm. Let's go over why those cards are important. So why are these cards so important? It's because that they generate an additional body once a land enters the battlefield. Now, Spring Heart Nantuko has another ability, but we really don't care too much about it. What we care about is the fact that it makes an additional insect, and Scoot Swarm does the same on a landfall trigger. Now, if you're able to get Scoot Swarm out with Nadu and something like an Umbral Mantle or Shuko on the battlefield at a very early stage of the game, effectively this means you can dump your entire mana base onto the table and draw is a strong word, your entire deck. That's because when your commander triggers, if it's a land, it comes onto the battlefield. Not only does it come onto the battlefield, it comes onto the battlefield untapped, and then that also triggers your Scoot Swarm, let's just say, or the Springheart Nantuko, to make another creature, which is a new creature, to trigger the twice per turn clause on your commander, meaning you effectively just go through your entire deck, because if you hit another land after equipping the Shuko to the new creature, the land comes in and then Scoot Swarm will make another insect, and eventually you get to the stage where Scoot Swarm, if that's the card you have out, actually starts making copies of itself, and then it's just exponential. You just hit your entire deck. So Scoot Swarm is the crazier of the two, but Springheart Nantuko basically does the same thing, because most likely you're going to be running probably 35 to 37 lands in that ballpark, where you can reliably, most of the time, hit a land to trigger the landfall trigger, and then just continuously generate that all the way down the line until you draw your deck and dump your entire mana base on the board. We also need to talk about another card that's very abusable, and that is Alchemist Alchemist. So this card can actually be abused in multiple different ways. Let's talk about by itself, however. So this card targets something to be untapped, and what you can do with the ability is actually target itself, meaning that Nadu gets the trigger once because it targets itself, it untaps itself, twice because you do it again, and then 3 times because you target Nadu with the ability. So you don't even need like the Umbral Mantle or that type of thing. As long as you have this card out, you'll get 3 instances at a minimum. And even better than that is if you have another card out on the battlefield called Unctus. Now, if you have the Alchemist and Unctus on the battlefield, the combo goes a little something like this. You activate the Alchemist by tapping it and targeting itself. And remember, the reason we can do this is because part of the cost to activate the ability, which there's the tap symbol and then a colon, everything before the colon is a part of the cost, meaning that you pay the cost first before the ability gets activated. So you tap your Alchemist, targeting itself, untapping it, and then the Alchemist will trigger, causing you to loot with Unctus's first ability. So you'll draw and then discard, and then you resolve the Alchemist triggered to untap it, and then basically you draw your entire deck. You loot your entire deck, so to speak. And this is just another inherent combo built into the deck. And honestly, Unctus is good by itself because you can just pay life to target things, which will keep your train rolling as well. Both of these cards are good by themselves and are broken when they're on the battlefield together. This is just another combo built into the deck. I think it's also important that we talk about flexible removal options. Now, you probably aren't going to be playing these in your CEDH list. At least, I take that back. You're only not going to play one of them, which is Kenrith's Transformation. Now, Kenrith's Transformation can target your own thing in the absence of having something to target, and that's good for a few reasons, because not only are you going to get the trigger off of Nadu, but you are also, on top of that, going to draw a card off of the Kenrith's Transformation and, hopefully get a land or something to keep it going. It's just really good. You can also run Odara, which I believe it can bounce your own thing, so you can just return something like your commander to your hand, reset it, and then keep the train going. Or Chain of Vapor to return something to your hand, because not only does that trigger your commander, but it also means that you can replay it and then go ahead and just keep the train rolling. So these flexible removal options are really important for the higher level functioning of this deck, and I wouldn't run this deck or commander without them. For the same reason of returning something to your hand, I'm actually running Shrieking Drake in this list. Now, importantly, Shrieking Drake does not actually target, so you're not going to get a trigger off of your commander, but what you do get to do is return something to your hand to reset the combo. So let's say you return a Mana Dork to your hand, play it back out. You can then equip it twice again with something like Shuko and continuously generate value on that and the Shrieking Drake, or return your commander all together, replay it, and rinse and repeat, like I just mentioned. So Shrieking Drake just basically makes this deck a bit more consistent and gives you more flexibility of options into the mid and to really probably not late game, but also late game, just because that really gets you over the finish line. We should also talk about a non-bow. So I actually saw this in like 2 deck lists that were made by a couple different YouTubers who I won't mention, but it's Misum Skin. So it's a non-bow because I see why it's in there. It has an overload cost. So this card basically targets something, and it's a low CMC targeting spell with an overload cost. I don't even remember the exact ability, but if you overload it, even though it says target creature, you don't get to target individually. It just turns into each creature gets this thing, meaning you're not actually going to be triggering Nadu because the overload replaces the targeting. It replaces that word target. So you do not get this. It does not trigger Nadu. Be very careful if you're looking to include cards that include the word overload, because that doesn't actually work with your commander. I also just want to bring to light one of the more recent prints of Flesh Duplicate. Now this is a 2-mana clone effect, which is really good because most of the time you're going to be hitting lands hopefully off of Nadu's ability, and in the event that you sort of run out of gas because you haven't hit enough creatures or enough lands to keep things rolling for you, you can cast Flesh Duplicate targeting Nadu, sacrifice your actual commander, sending it to the command zone for there to be the Flesh Duplicate on the battlefield with Nadu's new ability or new instance of the ability for you to continuously go through your deck again. Ideally, hopefully you end up hitting something like more lands to recast your commander, and then it just keeps going. It's a perpetual engine at that point. And I think we should also take this time to discuss sort of the final aspect of this, which is how are we going to win? So firstly, there's a card called Hullbreaker Horror. You might have heard of it. This card is disgusting. We're going to be able to easily cast it. And on top of that, it cannot be countered, which is important because if we're playing in a higher level pod, it makes it more difficult for our friends or maybe enemies, I don't know, to actually get around this card. Because what we're going to do effectively, if it sticks with our commander on the battlefield, is once we dump our entire deck onto the board, we bounce everything that our enemies have. And on top of that, once everything is bounced, our hand should be nice and full of counter spells, and then we will close out the game from there. So one way is basically the sort of lockout style. We're going to use Hullbreaker Horror. We're going to bounce everything to people's hands. We're going to control the board, and then once our hand is our deck, essentially, we just get to just make decisions for our friends without them actually being complicit in that decision. Importantly, this card also combos with Soul Ring and any 1 or 0 mana artifact. Basically, you tap Soul Ring for 2 mana, and then you use 1 or 0 of it to play another artifact like a Mana Crypt or maybe a Mana Vault, for instance, and then go ahead and tap that, floating the mana, replay the Soul Ring, and you're going to net infinite colorless mana off of this and then bounce everything to people's hands. That's important if you're playing a more CDH list. But let's talk about our last win con before we end the video. So the last win con is an oldie, but it's a goodie, and that's just Craterhoof Behemoth or a Finale of Devastation with X equaling some crazy value and giving everything, trample, haste, etc. Those cards, I think, are going to be important for you as Nadu players, but the interesting thing here is that you don't need that many win cons in this deck because ultimately your goal is just to hit your creature combo with one of your 0-cost equipment or something similar, and there's cards that we're running in the list in order to tutor those out, for instance. And then the game just collapses because once you draw your deck and have as much mana as you need on the board, you can then maybe take extra turns and then go ahead and swing out with your wide board or just continuously control the board with something like a Hullbreaker Horror, for instance. There's really not a need to run a high density of win con cards in the deck because your commander is going to basically get you there most of the time by itself, just by using a 0-cost equipment or some other looping targeting effect. So don't get too hung up on running a ton of different win conditions. You only need a couple to win. And I think those really are just Hullbreaker Horror and then like a Craterhoof Behemoth or Finale of Devastation type of effect in order to actually get over the finish line. I'm sorry if you can hear my dogs in the background as we wrap up this video, but that's pretty much it. Those are all of the common combos with the commander, also some caveats and little intricacies that are going to help you hopefully run the commander in your more competitive pods. And, I hope that the spirit of this video is overall a positive one. I want people to play this commander. Yeah, sorry about that. I want people to play this commander, but I want it to be done in a setting and where people aren't going to feel bad about you doing the degenerate combos super early. And again, it's one of those situations where if you bring this commander to a table and you're like, oh, no, 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 my Nadu list isn't like the other ones. I'm playing like an energy Nadu list, or I don't have any targeting in this deck or whatever. Don't be surprised when people don't believe you and they blow up your commander or counter it, etc., because they have heard and or have seen the things that it can do. But certainly if you're playing in higher power pods, etc., you know best. Play in those pods all you want. I think that this commander is going to be a lot of fun. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if in the future, depending on the severity of impact it makes, especially in more competitive circles, if it eventually gets banned, perhaps. Because it's in 2 colors, I think it's less likely, but it's a very strong effect for what it does. But that's it. Thank you, everyone, so much for watching. I hope this video was helpful. If you did find it helpful, please subscribe to the channel and please check out my Patreon, which is listed down in the description. As mentioned at the beginning of this video, we are going to be doing an entire week of content for you, meaning that you're going to get a video from me, a higher quality produced video every day for this entire week, including a culmination. I'm hoping I can get it done in time, which is where I go over all 100 plus of my commander decks that I've made this past year and we rank them. So be on the lookout for that this upcoming week. But otherwise, have a fantastic weekend and I'll see you guys tomorrow for another video. I've been Kyle and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.